An IDF strike at Nasser Hospital has lit a global firestorm. The media is up in arms, but what really happened inside Khan Yunis and what's cooking in Washington? President Trump is meeting today in the White House to map the day after, hinting the Gaza war could be over by year's end. In Jerusalem, Netanyahu sends a message to Lebanon. Help disarm Hezbollah and Israel will stand behind you. At the same time, Syria admits to U.S. brokered talks with Israel on a new security arrangement. What does this mean for Israel and the region? We're getting to the bottom of these stories on today's Israel Undiplomatic.
Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev, and as per usual, I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Bloom. How are you today, Ruthie?
I'm pretty good, Mark, all things considered, one of which is a big issue that just happened, and you and I have to discuss it, and that is the global outcry over the IDF's hitting of a hospital in Khan Yunis in Gaza, and the world claiming that we killed a bunch of journalists and hospital staff and that we targeted civilians. And our prime minister apologized and said it was a tragic accident, and so did the IDF spokesman. And then the following day, after an investigation, it turns out that an apology was not necessary.
So I don't think the Prime Minister, to be precise, actually apologized. He expressed regret at the possibility that we'd hit uninvolved people, that we'd hit medical workers and so forth. He didn't actually say, sorry, I apologize. He said, this is not the sort of thing we want to do, and I regret if it happened. And here, I think, first of all, we have to put this into context. Since this war started, Israel has been accused of attacking hospitals. Since day one of this war, Israel has been bombing hospitals, destroying hospitals, and it's like we're anti-humanitarian. That's the accusation. And what isn't explained, or isn't explained long enough and well enough, is the fact that Hamas has a deliberate strategy of creating its military infrastructure, its terrorist infrastructure, underneath and inside hospitals. In fact, I have spoken to experts in the field, and they've told me that there's not a single hospital in Gaza that hasn't been exploited by Hamas as part of its military machine, either bunkers underneath or weapons storage or holding hostages there or using it for command and control, precisely because they know that hospitals are in a war zone. They're supposed to be protected sites. But according to international law, and I'm not an international lawyer, but I've been briefed by people who know these things, the minute Hamas turns the hospital into a military site, then the status has changed under the law. I was told the following, is a bridge a military target? If the bridge is just allowing civilians to cross it, it's not a legitimate target. The minute the enemy moves its tanks across the bridge, you can destroy the bridge. That's the law. It's the same, unfortunately, though we have to do our utmost to leave uninvolved people out of, not see them caught up in the crossfire. But that Hamas has a deliberate strategy of exploiting hospitals is undeniable, and that Israel's had to contend with that is also undeniable.
No, of course, but also the IDF spokesman, here's the trouble. He said the first words out of his mouth were this was a tragic accident, meaning, of course, we didn't target it, but innocent people were killed and we're really sorry. That was the whole gist of it, okay? It turns out it wasn't a tragic accident. For days, the IDF had noticed that on the roof of that hospital, Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, the roof was being used as a surveillance tower. It was surveilling the troops, number one. Number two, it has since been discovered, not even discovered, for months. Palestinian Media Watch have produced evidence that that is a hospital that is used to interrogate and torture other Gazans who are supposedly, not obeying Hamas enough. And we also know, I don't know if hostages were held in this hospital specifically. I don't know. We do know at Shifa Hospital, we know that other hospitals in Gaza had hostages. We even saw footage of that. But here's the other thing. the world, including Israelis. The Israeli left always parrots the enemy. And the latest one is the announcement by the Israeli Press Association condemning our killing of all these journalists. Okay, now, first of all, we know that 6 of those people, those journalists, I say with quotes, because in Gaza, there are 2 things. First of all, one of them actually participated in the October 7th massacre. The others are all Hamas journalists or Hamas-affiliated journalists, or when even other news outlets, like say you take Reuters or some other news outlet, what is known is if they don't toe the Hamas line, they're dead or they're not allowed in. That's all there is to it. Okay. So they're not journalists. And in this case, 6 of them are known terrorists, absolutely proven to be terrorists. Now, you could call someone a journalist just because he runs around with a camera documenting rapes and slaughter, right? Well, that's not what we call journalists. And I am appalled that the Israeli left constantly jumps right in to accuse our boys. By the way, it's, the hostages, we know the hostages have families. We all have sons, husbands, daughters, everyone as soldiers. Our families are not war criminals and they do not target innocent people. But yes, they do have to go after military targets because otherwise they're dead. And there is no dilemma there. And I'm sick and tired of it. And I think the Israeli left should be excoriated for doing that.
So I think there is a dilemma in certain circumstances, and I'll articulate that now. First of all, when people say Israel's killing journalists, right? So we have killed journalists deliberately because they're also being terrorists. And like a terrorist can be, in his day job can be he's a teacher, or he's a mathematician, or he's a philosopher, or he's a religious preacher, yes? But if he's a terrorist, it doesn't matter what his day job is. And if your journalist is your day job, but at night you're putting missiles together for the Qassam brigades or something, right? You're still a terrorist and you're a legitimate target. That's the first point. Second point, and this is where the dilemma comes up. According to the Gaza Ministry of Health, right, which we take everything they say with a grain of salt because it's Hamas control.
A grain of salt?
Yes, but they say 20 people were killed in the attack. And Israel has pointed to 6 people who we know for sure were terrorists. Now, let's say, and I think it's fair that Hamas's Ministry of Health exaggerates the numbers, let's say 15 people were killed, right? It still means that maybe half the people who were killed in that strike were civilians or uninvolved or weren't Hamas or other terrorists. Now, that is something that's always a dilemma from Israel. You can ask a legitimate question is to get a senior terrorist or to take care of a legitimate military target, to what extent, what is an acceptable level of collateral damage? Now, to say there can be no collateral damage, I'm sorry, you can't fight a war. You definitely can't fight a war in a built-up military area. But so what is it? And my understanding is, yes, that Israel, by international standards, has been fighting this war with a relatively low level of collateral damage, especially compared to situations where you're fighting in built-up urban areas. Now, if we consider that Hamas, first of all, has to be blamed for turning a hospital into a military site, yes? Because if it wasn't a military site, we wouldn't have attacked it in the first place. That's for sure. And so the question is, the dilemma is always, what is an acceptable level of collateral damage to strike a legitimate military target?
Now, you're absolutely right, but it's not just the ratio of non-combatants to combatants. There's another issue that somehow nobody's talking about. On the roof of that hospital was a surveillance. The soldiers below were in the crosshairs. It's on video, okay? Now, when I moved to Israel almost 50 years ago, I remember I had a professor at the Hebrew University who said he presented a dilemma. If you're walking with your baby and you come across an Arab woman and she has her baby and a bomb strapped to her, or she's holding a gun at you, I can't remember the exact, but she's about to kill you and your baby. What do you do? And there's a child in front of her. And I said, that's a dilemma? That's not a dilemma. I'm holding a baby and she's pointing a gun with her baby. I shoot to kill her. What do you mean? And the baby. I don't know, to protect myself. Here, that's our situation. And especially now, because Israel is trying we are trying to evacuate all the civilians from the Gaza City area. We're trying to do that and encircle it. Hamas is torturing them and preventing them from evacuating. That's one situation. The other is we're also conducting negotiations to try to get all the hostages out. So we're in this situation where many, many Israeli soldiers, rather than being on the offensive, are right now only on the defensive. They're and all their parents are saying, look, they're sitting ducks. You can't, the less they move, the more they're targeted. Who was targeted in this operation were our soldiers. And so if innocent people were killed, and I'm willing to accept that they were, they should have evacuated. Hamas doesn't let them. That may be tragic to their families, but the choice always is, and whose families? Israel is the innocent party in this war. We were attacked. We're continuing to be attacked. It could end tomorrow, today, yesterday, if Hamas put down its arms and released all the hostages. So in a choice like that, you have to choose your life or the person who's trying to kill you's life. So I'm sorry. That's basically.
I would also want to raise the issue of the fact that, Palestinian journalists in Gaza either want to or have to follow the Hamas party line, right? They'll never report something that Hamas doesn't want them to report. They'll never take a picture of something that Hamas doesn't want them to take a picture of. And we spoke about this, I think it was last week or the week before. We said that the press in Gaza amplifies Hamas's talking points. They amplify Hamas's message, and it's all picked up by the international media because the BBC has someone there and NPR has someone there and all the big networks, CNN, they all have people in Gaza. And what they're getting from Gaza is, of course, not objective journalism, because an objective journalist in Gaza wouldn't live. Hamas would take care of him. They wouldn't be allowed to do their job. It's Hamas's talking points. They have to follow the guidance of their terrorist authoritarian regime that runs the Gaza Strip. Having said that, I don't believe, and we might disagree on this, that a journalist who works for Reuters or BBC or NPR, right, though he's doing, he's amplifying Hamas's talk points, he's part of he's an associate in many ways to the Hamas's propaganda machine.
A stringer.
He's an associate to the Hamas military propaganda machine. I'm not sure that makes him a legitimate target for a strike. If he's got a day job as a journalist and a night job, he's part of the military, Hamas, of course he's a legitimate target. I think someone who's just on the propaganda side, not sure. I do make a distinction, though. I think a journalist who works for what I think it's called El Quds television or the Al-Aqsa television, there's a station that is actually Hamas's station. That means they're Hamas members and they're part of the organization. That's a different story. I think they are legitimate targets.
But, okay, I agree with you. But here I wasn't talking about legitimate target. I wasn't talking about targeting journalists. I would say in a case like that, you're in a war zone. Okay, you're in a war zone. Don't think that putting the word press across your chest protects you from RPGs, from being caught in the crossfire. You should, if you've decided to take your life in your own hands to do that, I know there are journalists in all kinds of war zones. We know that. They always are. But there's a huge risk doing that. That's number one. Number two, you say about objective journalism, there is no more such thing. There is no such thing as objective journalism anymore. Okay, it's not reportage that's free, not on either side of the spectrum, I have to admit. But you see Israeli journalists, you say, oh, these ones are influenced by Hamas. What about our journalists? Why are they influenced by the Hamas health ministry? Why are they siding with Al Jazeera journalists and far left? Because that's their ideology. So forget about objective journalism. And no, you shouldn't target, and you shouldn't target people. People should get out of the way of a war zone. Okay, I wouldn't want to go hang around Gaza there. The only way you could do that is by being under the protection of the IDF. And then the journalists in the world would say, well, that doesn't count. The IDF is sending them in.
What's the problem is Israel's in a catch-22. Because when we ask people to leave a combat zone, we're accused of forcing people to leave. And if people are caught up in the crossfire in a combat zone, then that's also a crime. It's like they've always got it. Whatever Israel does, it's wrong. I do think, however, we have an ethical obligation to do, within the framework of winning the war. We have to win the war, but we have an ethical obligation to do our utmost to limit collateral damage where we can.
We do.
But I want to, so
But
on the
we
point of the
do.
journalists, these charges that Israel is somehow targeting journalists, yes, which is repeated ad infinitum by all sorts of people. What's the bottom line? And people forget this. You take Jerusalem and you draw, I don't know, 500 miles in every direction, maybe 1,000 miles in every direction. Are we not the only country in the region and beyond that has a free press? We're definitely the only country in the Middle East that has a truly free press.
Of course.
I mean, the press in Israel, large parts of the Israeli press, let's hate Netanyahu, want to take him down, right? In fact, the most important, the highest rating news station in Israel on television has got a clear agenda, right? I don't think that's deniable. There are other stations with different agendas. There's now stations that support the right in Israel. One
television station.
Maybe one and a half, right?
Okay.
But there are newspapers with different opinions and so
Total
forth.
freedom of the press.
All right. But there's total freedom of the press in Israel. And yet we are accused by people of deliberately, hitting journalists and killing. It's ridiculous. We're the only country in the region. And here, Hamas also gets a free ride because, of course, the press in Gaza don't report the sort of things they have to deal with. But we know for a fact, yes, the danger they face if they would ever, and that's why they can't do it, write or report something bad that Hamas didn't want them to report.
Well, of course.
We know about the intimidation to them and their families.
Of course. But that's why I'm saying that shame on the Journalists Association in Israel. How dare it? It should be the first to come out and say that we have total press freedom and that Hamas doesn't and that Gaza doesn't. No, instead, they always side with the enemy. It drives me crazy. But let's talk now about another thing that's been making headlines and confusing hostage families and whatever. People don't know exactly what's going on with President Trump because in the last couple of days he's very free talking to reporters, which is great because it's refreshing to have a president, to have a leader who says, "Ask me anything and I'll answer anything." The trouble is that Trump often, he talks from the hip. He doesn't always know, or shoots from the hip, I should say. So he said a couple of things. One thing he said was, there are probably fewer than 20 hostages still alive in Gaza. Now, Israelis went crazy. Understandably, they're terrified. And they said, oh, my God, does he know something we don't know? And the person in charge of dealing with the hostage family said, no, as far as we know, the number is still 20 live hostages. So that's one thing he said that made everybody nervous because, after all, he's the president of the United States and maybe he knows from somebody the numbers. That's one. The other thing he said was, things are progressing and we ought to be, in 2 or 3 weeks or something, we ought to be done. And it wasn't clear if he meant done, we'll get all the hostages back, or done with the war. But then there's Steve Witkoff, the envoy, the special Middle East envoy, who said something else. And so there's people are saying, wait. And then, as Witkoff said, he thinks that by the end of the year, the war will have reached a decisive victory. So there's a lot of confusion, and we don't know what that means. Is it just Trump talking because he says a lot of stuff? Or is this really true? He is in negotiations with other countries also to take in Gazans, etc.
So I always think when I hear President Trump that there's always a method to the supposed madness. And I think when he said what he said, I think it's part of putting the pressure on Hamas, saying, listen, unless you guys agree to a deal now, then they have a green light for me to go into Gaza City and to clean you all out, right? And that can be over in 2-3 weeks once I give that goes ahead. And he's also saying, though, which is the converse side, and if you agree to a ceasefire, it'll also be over. And so I think it's his way of putting pressure on them. Of course, some people interpret it as pressure on Israel. Everyone says, there are some people always looking for daylight between the White House and Jerusalem, yes?
The Israeli left, to be specific.
All right. And
Always
yeah.
looking for that.
but I interpret always and I saw it as a statement that has utilitarian purpose. And he's been doing this deliberately over the last few weeks, is beefing up the pressure on Hamas that this is coming to an end one way or another, as he likes to say. This will end, and the Israelis will go in and clean you out unless you get a deal. I think also there's a feeling, and I think this is true. This has been going on for close to 2 years now. What is it? 590 days? Sorry.
600, almost 700.
Yeah.
Point is, on October 7th, it'll be 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think there is a feeling, look, this has been going on for too long. But what's one of the reasons it's been going on for so long? First of all, Israel was fighting a multi-front war, correct? We had to worry about Lebanon. We had to worry about Syria. We had to worry about Iran. We've still got to worry about the Houthis. This morning, I was woken up at 5:30 in the morning because there was a siren in where I live.
Yeah.
And so Israel had to keep its eye on not on one bull, but on a whole bunch of bulls. We had to juggle, right? Second point is, let's be frank, and I'll say it politely, and you'll say it not politely. The Biden administration did place limitations on Israel and what we could do, right? And there was a concern about all sorts of issues that, we wouldn't get weapons we needed for another round and so forth. And the third point, which needs to be said, is the fear of the hostages. That is there in the Israeli thinking, that if we took steps like one of the issues about going into Gaza City is it's clear information that there are hostages there. And that by going in, are we going to put their lives at risk? And it's clear there is risk involved. But I would argue there's also risk involved in doing nothing. But I think they're the reasons why the war's been going on for so long. And I think there is people around the world say, finish it already. One way or the other, finish it. And I think that's where we are. One way or the other, we have to finish this.
Right. Now, here's another complication is that there's a very vociferous protest movement in Israel, claiming to be the movement of the hostage families and their backers. But actually, half of the hostage families do not agree with the protest movement. The whole, as you say, let's be clear. Every Israeli wants those hostages home. Every Israeli knows either a hostage family or has a hostage in Gaza or knows a soldier, whatever. We're all in this together in that sense. Not every one of us has a child held captive in Gaza, that's for sure. But every Israeli wants them home. So then the argument becomes, what is the best way to pressure Hamas? But the protest movement is pressuring Netanyahu, accusing him of all kinds of things, saying he doesn't care about them, saying that he doesn't want a deal. So when he makes a deal, it's a partial deal. They say, no, we want all the hostages. When he says, okay, all the hostages, they yell at him for not wanting a partial deal. They're confused. But it's not the hostage families who are confused, okay? Because the ones who are still alive, there are 20 families in a country of 10 million people, okay? And when they take to the streets, there are many anti-government protesters joining them who their whole reason is to topple Netanyahu. And that's all well and good, do it. But we're at war right now. And the other half of the hostage families think that all that pressure on Netanyahu just encourages Hamas. The way the protests before the war started encouraged Hamas. And we know that from documents retrieved from Gaza. They said, oh my God, Israeli society is imploding. This is a good time to launch an attack. And so this has created another element that is causing it to drag on with these protests in the streets and blocking roads. And if you dare criticize them for doing that, you're accused of not caring about the hostages and that you have no sense of human dignity or something. And it's absolutely nonsense.
And I think he's a friend of yours, when the U.S. ambassador to Jerusalem, Huckabee, is asked, what about the Germans? What about the French? All these Europeans are saying different things. He says they make a mistake if they put the onus on Israel to solving this and not the onus on Hamas. And he's very clear about that in all his interviews. He says it's wrong to blame Israel. It's not to put Israel. If this is going to finish, the pressure should be on Hamas, not on Israel. I think I'm quoting him directly. And I think part of the problem with the internal discussion in Israel is that they're putting the pressure on us when the pressure should really be on Hamas. Now, it's clear that Israelis have the right to criticize their government and to demand their government do more and so forth. But I think it's a mistake. And what is the fear is that Hamas sees the international pressure on Israel, and they see the internal pressure by the hostage families and the people who are supposedly supporting them, yes. And they think the external pressure and the internal pressure, in the end, the government will have to stop the war, and we will survive, and we'll come out of our tunnels, we'll come out of our hiding places, and we will reassert control over Gaza. And all we have to do to win this war, yes, win the war means to survive and take over Gaza when it's over, is just to grit our teeth. And so there's suffering around us that doesn't bother them. There's death around them. They don't give a hoot about the civilian population of Gaza. All we have to do is grit our teeth and stay on. And in the end, the internal pressure and or the external pressure will bring an end to this to our advantage. And that's why I think those people, I'm sure they're really very good people who are protesting because they believe in solidarity with the hostages and all that. But are they not, and I think you're making a serious argument, are they not inadvertently actually perpetuating the current situation? Because Hamas will not release hostages because they're Boy Scouts and they've suddenly decided to become moral people. No, Hamas will only release hostages if there's amazing, strong, consistent pressure on them, and that they understand that pressure's not only not going to let up, but that pressure is actually going to get worse from their perspective. And once again, creating the illusion that they just have to, bite their lips and this is going to be over. That's perpetuating the problem. That's the problem with the Europeans. The Europeans say they want a ceasefire in Gaza, yes, but by calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, they're actually undermining what the Americans are trying to do and get a ceasefire in place. Because why would Hamas agree to any conditions if they think they can get it all for free?
Well, absolutely. But here's the thing, and I think I know that some of our viewers have commented on YouTube as well as in our emails that that maybe, and especially me, because you're much more tempered than I am, that somehow if my son were held in Gaza, I wouldn't be talking this way. Now, I don't know how I'd be talking. I'd be lying if I said I knew. But here's what I do know. I know several parents of hostages who talk just like me. And the reason our viewers may not know that is because the main channels in Israel and abroad do not like to interview those families. They like to interview the families that say Netanyahu just wants to stay in power and let's just get all that. Those are the people who are front and center at the protests on the stages. But there are half of those families agree with what I said. So it is true that I don't know what I would do if my child were in Gaza. But I do know parents whose sons are in Gaza who say exactly what I'm saying. And that's why I don't mind saying it, because, again, I'm not speaking for everybody else. One thing we know is that Hamas, it's enough if it holds one hostage. See, that's what I think people don't realize. We make another deal, they build more tunnels. We make another ceasefire deal, they build more tunnels. It's enough for them to have one left. The whole country will still be up in arms over one person, because we know that. We know that from the Gilad Shalit deal. We know that so because Hamas knows that we do care about every human life. That's precisely the point. That not only do we care about every human life of ours, but we also care about other people's human lives. And that's why we try not to kill non-combatants in Gaza. That's why we try to feed them. We're sending aid to feed them, not Hamas. We try to help them move out of the way. And that we are attacked for just the opposite is just distressing. And I think much of that is anti-Semitism. Some of it is stupidity. And a third of it is taking the cue from these Israeli leftists who are going around spouting lies about the country.
Could I'll talk about someone who's associated with the protest movement very strongly, and that is former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who I worked for before I worked for Netanyahu. And I specifically remember during the Gilad Shalit protests, yes, Gilad Shalit, a soldier, was held for 5 years, I think, in Gaza. And there was this whole protest movement, free Gilad Shalit, pay the price, release the hostages, Palestinian terrorists in Israel so we can get this young boy out, his young soldier, I should say. And I remember Olmert saying publicly, the protests don't help the negotiations. The protests just encourage Hamas to increase their demands. And what was true then, I believe, is still true today. And that what Olmert said then was the truth.
Wait. Finish that sentence.
And
What he
today,
said then and today he says.
I
we're
said
committing war
he's
crimes.
associated with the protest movement.
No, not only is he associated with it, has turned so anti-Israel that it's not funny. He says we're committing crime. He is vilifying Israel around the world. And they say, see, even a former prime minister says that.
I would be more careful in the way I would say that.
Have
I
you
wouldn't
heard
say
him say-
anti-Israel. I'd say he's so strongly anti-government that he plays into the hands of people who hate
No,
Israel.
not only.
That's-
Have you heard his wording? Anybody who says we are committing war crimes, I'm sorry, that is against the country. That is not against the government. It's against the army. It's against our soldiers. How dare he? I know you say you would. No, it's justice. No, he has become a radical, one of those radical protest leaders. And
I want to change the subject because we've only got 3 minutes left, and I want to say interesting good news this week. There were 2 issues on Israel's northern border. Prime Minister Netanyahu sent a public message to the Lebanese president and saying he supports the decision of the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah, something that should have happened years ago, and that they're starting this process and that Israel will support that process and can be expected to do things that will be good for Lebanon if that process continues. I think the hint is that we'll pull out our forces that remain in those 5 points in South Lebanon. There is ultimately a very positive dynamic in Lebanon because we destroy basically Hezbollah's military machine. Maybe there's some residual power left, but on the whole, and the Lebanese have a chance to get their country back. That's a good thing. And the formal disarmament of Hezbollah, I mean, we did most of the disarmament, but the weapons they have left, that they should be taken over by the Lebanese state and not in the hand of this pro-Iranian terrorist militia. Good thing. The second thing, very quickly, it was reported this week and not denied that there are interesting talks between Israel and Syria, not on a peace agreement, but on some sort of non-belligerency security arrangements that will return us to the 1974 ceasefire lines, which means Israel is, of course, on the Golan Heights and will remain on the Golan Heights. Also, interesting developments in Lebanon and in Syria, both of them possibly good for Israel.
Oh, right. And both of them possibly bad for Israel, specifically Syria, more than Lebanon. But Lebanon as well. I have to tell you, it's true. Our ceasefire deal with Lebanon that we did sign last year has worked out only because we are still keeping our powder dry, so to speak, and attacking any Hezbollah movement. And we reserved that right in that ceasefire agreement. So, yes, we're in a ceasefire, and no, we're not exactly, because we're still fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon. We're not fighting Lebanon, we're fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon. So that sounds good. Great. Okay, Lebanon says, okay, we'll disarm them. So you want to say, really? So where have you been? And how come you're not doing it now? And so now we know that Lebanon is against Hezbollah. I mean, the majority. However, Hezbollah has been a major political party in the Lebanese parliament. I'll believe it when I see it, is what I'm trying to say. And if the deal means, okay, Israel says, great, you're helping us. Now we're going to withdraw from the 5 points where we're keeping military watch, making sure that we're safe. I'm nervous. Anytime Israel says that means we withdraw something in order to help an Arab country, I get nervous. Now, Syria in particular, because Ashara, whose real name is al-Julani, is an Al-Qaeda, ISIS terrorist who says he's reformed. But the massacres he's been committing in Syria against Druze and Bedouin and others suggests that he hasn't really changed his colors. So when you make a deal with him and he says, oh, no, why do you think he says, well, not peace with Israel? Of course, heaven forbid. Okay. You have to be extremely careful with terrorists like that, because what do you mean? You may put on a suit and now he's not a terrorist? Just recently, he was committing massacres in Syria. So I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him in. I don't know if that's a positive development. It's all well and good for us to say that for international relations. we have to keep our weapons cocked in that direction, in our northern,
Oh,
along our northern borders.
Ruthie, I agree 100%. We have to keep our weapons cocked, if that's the right word, your expression, not mine. But we have to keep our powder dry, and we have to keep watching, and we have to be vigilant. That's the truth. Unfortunately, the dilemma we face in Syria is the following. You're correct. This man, comes from Al Qaeda and extreme jihadism. He's now running Syria, and he's weak, and so he wants to make deals maybe because he is weak. And when he gets stronger, he could turn on us. I have no doubts. But there's a more immediate question, and that is if Syria sort of implodes into some sort of civil war, and then does Iran and Hezbollah come back, and then we've got a problem like we had in the old days, and that also affects Lebanon. In other words, maybe, let's be clear, this man has many faults, but he's no friend of Iran and no friend of Hezbollah. And though I agree, keep our powder dry, keep our eye on the ball, do we not have an interest in maintaining an anti-Iranian, anti-Hezbollah sort of power, especially not allowing them, those bad actors like, Iran and Hezbollah, to come into the cracks back into Syria? We don't want that to happen.
No, absolutely. It's just that we've seen before. I mean, we have a couple of allies. We're not going to go into that right now.
Yeah.
A couple of allies, I put in quotes, with whom we have peace treaties, who turn on us on a dime, and they have throughout this war, and they're accusing us of all kinds of crimes, and they don't want to help with the Gazans, and all they do is so that's for another show, that's for another broadcast. But I think let's just not let's not have our head in the clouds about how peace is busting out all
I didn't
over.
say what I said. There were some positive movements for Israel,
I know.
and I have no illusions who our neighbors are, and I know that any arrangements we reach have to be buttressed by Israel's ability to defend itself by itself when we need to. We live in a rough part of the world, and we have to be strong. And with those almost philosophical words, I say farewell until next week, Ruthie Bloom.
Till next week.